Hey guys, I've got some new concept art for you today. Today's video is going to be a time-lapse video where I'm just going to talk about some of my thought process for the image and some of the techniques and the workflow I chose to use to approach it. I'm also going to talk about some of my mistakes and things that if I were to do the image again, I would do differently probably. Things like not designing something fully in the beginning stages and kind of having to wing it and figure it out as I go, with color and lighting and all this stuff taken into account, is much harder than just like doing it in stages, staying disciplined and taking care of all that stuff right away at the beginning. Making big changes to your image. A lot of people struggle with this, and it's when you know something is bothering you about your image, but you're afraid to change it because you've already spent so much time on it. It's especially hard if the image is in the end stages. So you need to be able to make those changes, and you need to just bite the bullet and do it, because I promise you you'll feel better about it at the end. If you feel off about something, you got to trust your gut, and you got to know that anyone else looking at it will probably feel off about it too. So it's really important to just, suck it up and make those big changes. So there's a great example of that in this piece. So yeah, I hope you guys like this video. Thank you so much for watching. Let's go. So the idea for this concept was kind of like an ancient tower in an old growth, massive kind of forest that has kind of swallowed the ruins of this castle, and the last part of the castle that's visible is this tower that's kind of peeking out of all the overgrowth. So that's the whole basic gist of it. For these kind of things, I like to write myself a little brief that is like, just a few sentences that gets the kind of vibe and the mood and the kind of the feel that I want it to have and the feel I want the viewer to have. So I think for this, it was just something like, I wanted it kind of serene and peaceful, but not like happy. I wanted it to be mysterious and kind of really this epic but peaceful moment where we're discovering this tower in this forest. So a lot of kind of forest lighting. I want a lot of moisture in the air, and I want it to feel alive and damp, and I wanted to have that really kind of misty, moody forest feel. So that's what I went into it thinking, and I got a few references. I probably got too many references, and I should have narrowed my search down a bit, but one of the main things, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, is that I should have really spent the time to create a tower design. I think it would have helped ground a lot of these early sketches, and it would have made them easier had I incorporated that into the process of these thumbnails. I think each of these thumbnails took me about 10 minutes, but if I had added like 5 minutes of just designing a tower, and I could kind of work that into the comps and try and have all that working together, because as it is right now, it was kind of hard for me to latch on to any of the compositions I was making, because I wasn't really happy with the tower in any of them, and it was kind of making the compositions less appealing to me. So I wish I had just spent some more time thinking about the design of the tower in these early stages, for sure. For these early sketches, I was mainly using this kind of opaque chisel brush that I made. It doesn't have any shape dynamics or anything or tilt. I kind of just manually tilt it to any angle that I want to get. I like using this for graphic sketching because it gives some really nice shapes, and you can create some really interesting shadow shapes with it. It's pretty basic setup. I usually do the same setup for these kind of graphic sketches. I just do like, a few layers, like 4 or 5 layers for the midground, the background, and then I'll add some shadow shapes in on top of that. So that's kind of the technique I'm using for these. But I'm mainly just trying to evoke the feel of the space in these. And one of the issues I ran into in the early stages here was the scale. I never really decided how big the tower was going to be, and this goes back to a design issue. And I wish I had decided how big it was going to be, because then I would have known going into the compositions how big to make the trees, and it would have made sense to me. Because one of the struggles I had here was, if the tower is really big, how's it going to be inside of a forest? I wanted it to be a view inside the forest and under the cover of these massive trees. So the tower could only be so big. So then I ran into issues of like, okay, well, how am I going to justify having this tower in this forest and not just like poking out the top? I did explore some thumbnails that were more Vista shots where the tower was poking out the top of the trees, just to like see if for some reason that's what I actually wanted to do. But I explored them, but I decided like I wanted to stick to my original plan of being inside the forest. And what I actually ended up doing to solve that was, I decided I was going to have this kind of really deep valley or crevice basically in the forest, where the tower is rising out of that. It's kind of perched on a really tall vertical rock face that's down in the valley. So that way we can be kind of looking down into this valley, and this tower is like kind of cresting out the top of it, and the tree canopies are still creating that like occlusion from the sun and creating all that nice forest lighting on the tower. Sketching this while recording, definitely some of those like personal anxieties come out, where it's like the sketches are hard to get going, I found, when I'm recording, especially because like I like I said earlier, like I feel a little bit tense, and as soon as if the sketch doesn't come together really quick and start looking like something cool, you get kind of anxious, and you kind of stiffen up and feel like you lose a bit of confidence. So it's definitely hard. This stage is really hard, like when I'm recording, I find, and I think it's because I haven't figured anything out yet. The later stages are a little bit easier because at least I have the foundation and I can just build off of that. But this was actually quite a challenge, and I instantly regretted choosing like a forest. Compositionally, it's a hard thing to sketch and keep simplified and readable with all the trees and like the noisiness that can happen. I instantly was like, oh my god, I should have just chosen like a mountain range or something, or like a rocky desert or something. But I'm glad that I did. It was a challenge, and I'm glad that I stuck with it. And there were a few moments where I felt like starting over, but I'm glad I stuck with it. And that can also just be applied to concept art process in general. Is like you can feel like starting over a lot when stuff doesn't come together quick, and sometimes that is a good thing to do if it's just really not working, and just for the sake of your mental, it's like sometimes it is good to just start over. But I think there's also value in sticking through things, especially when you're learning, sticking with it, seeing it through to the end, realizing the mistakes and the roadblocks that you hit, and just kind of learning from those. And then the next image, you'll have the confidence to kind of push through those. And like finishing an image through a bunch of struggles is definitely a huge confidence booster. So especially if you're learning, I do encourage you to just push through stuff, get stuff 100% finished from beginning to end. Don't just give up in the middle when it's not looking like professional artwork. Like if you're learning, it's not going to look pro. It's going to look terrible, and like you're really not going to like it. But like I promise you that finishing it is really something that's important, I find. And once I started doing that when I was learning, I found I improved way faster, because at least I had the discipline and the mental fortitude to finish it. And then it's really absorbed in my brain, because I spent so long and made so many mistakes that you would do anything not to make those mistakes the next time, So I encourage you to just push through those moments for sure, and try and finish as much art as you can. So these sketches, I would say I liked very few of them, and pretty much as soon as I did the one that I ended up choosing, I knew I was going to choose it, because it just happens like that sometimes, especially with personal work. Well, mainly with personal work, but because if you're doing like client work, it's often the case that for some reason, it's often the case that they'll choose the one that you like the least of your sketches. So, but when you're just kind of self-directing and doing personal work, as soon as you do a sketch that is just working and it just clicks and it kind of captures the feel that you had in your mind, you just know right away, and it's a really good feeling. It's like you've been messing around with a bunch of different ideas, and you're trying to find something to like hook onto, and when you actually finally get it, it's like, okay, you feel this like little bit of relief. So this one right here obviously is the one that I went with. It just had that kind of, this is where I found the solution of kind of this valley in a forest, and I found like ways to bring the tree trunks into the composition and have them kind of hanging over the composition, and that can justify a lot of really cool lighting. And they're occluding the sun, and you can kind of get away with any lighting you want in that case, because I can have shadows wherever I want, because I can just justify it by saying, oh, it's being cast by a tree canopy that's off screen. So colorizing this image right here is the same process I used in my last video with gradient maps. You can go watch that if you want like a more in-depth kind of real-time explanation. But I basically get a color palette going just over every layer, just one gradient map to get a base like few colors going. Once I'm satisfied at that stage, I duplicate that and clip it to each layer. I think there's about 5 layers. Then I go in with adjustment layers on each individual layer and start pushing the blues and the shadows and the warms and the lights in this case, and adding a little bit more color information and variation within each layer. And then when I'm satisfied with that, I merge those to each layer, so I'm back to about 5 or 6 layers. And then I just start painting, direct painting with a brush. This is an area where if I had spent more time figuring out the designs of specific things earlier, this part would be much less stressful, because I would just have to paint, worry about lighting, colors, and textures. But at this stage, when I was actually doing it, I was thinking, what am I going to do with the tower? What am I going to do with this statue in the foreground? And I kind of was just too eager to paint. I don't know, maybe it's because I was recording or something, but I was just like, I just want to like get going and get some colors and lighting going. This is one of those times where my eagerness to just paint got the better of me, and I should have just stayed disciplined and said, okay, I'm going to pause here. Before I go into colors, I got to figure out what's happening with this tower and with the statue. Another thing I realized in the middle of this image is I just had too many references. And I think as a concept artist, sometimes like when you're working like professionally, you kind of realize that, you know, there's so many different things that need to be in every concept, from your art director or from your creative director or whoever. There's usually a ton of references floating around, and you kind of need to pay attention to all of them and try and get little bits of information like from all these different sources. So I think I've just gotten used to like gathering a million images when I'm getting ready to make my own personal work. But I feel like being simpler about it is better, and having one really strong reference will benefit you a lot, because you can like draw a lot of information from that more permanently than looking at a huge page and try and get little pieces here and there. I think having like one really good reference for the overall color and mood is great, and then you can have a few more specific references for like foreground elements or you know, materials. Like if a material needs to be wet and you want to see how that looks in a realistic way, having specific references for that is great. So, but yeah, I think keep it simple and just try and extract as much info from one reference as you can. So this is the huge change I made. I went from a a landscape aspect ratio to a portrait, basically making the canvas vertical. The reason I did this is because I felt like I wanted more of a hook, like more of a fantasy kind of grab to the image. Like I felt like just the tower was like not epic or really crazy enough. I felt like I could push it a lot, and design wise, like this is one of the issues that I could have solved earlier, is like I wanted a little bit more of a interesting design, and I think really pushing the verticality helped me feel the original vision I had for the concept, which is this kind of really epic thing. And instantly I kind of felt the verticality. As soon as I made this change, I felt the verticality of the forest, and I can feel the trees kind of just reaching towards like the top of the canvas and really framing everything. And it kind of felt like you feel this kind of almost like a cathedral feeling with this kind of soft and damp forest lighting and green hues bouncing everywhere. And I just felt the image breathed a lot more when I made this change. So, and it was hard to make because I had made substantial progress with the painting, and like the mood was in. I had rendered a little bit of like the tower, and you know, I'd started moving towards the final version, and it was hard, but you know, as soon as I did it, like I felt like this is a really good move and I need to just commit to this now. So how I did it, and I recommend if you're gonna make a big change, you can do it this way, is I just made a duplicate of the image as a flat one layer on top. So I copied every layer and merged them. So I have one flattened version of the image on top. And I just make changes to that. So I just cut it with the lasso, move stuff around, warp things, and like paint right over stuff. That's a good like way of just testing stuff quickly without feeling too careful about managing your layers. And it's a nice non-destructive way that you can be really loose and make changes. Because like when you're gonna make big changes, I find like you have to stay loose about it, and you gotta push stuff to the extreme. Because when you push stuff to an extreme and push it way further than you think it needs to go, usually you find that the further you push it, the better, because we're always a little bit more reserved than we should be, I think. Worst case scenario, if you do push it too far, it's much easier to dial that back. The hardest thing is to push things far enough. So always when you're making those big changes that you need to make, just go really crazy with it. And then if you really feel like, oh, it's way too crazy of a change, you can just dial it back a bit, but at least you'll know that limit. The other big thing in this image, the big learning point for me, was right here, the statue in the foreground. You can see it, I'm at a pretty advanced stage of the painting, and I just really didn't like the statue. I didn't like the design. It didn't fit the world that the painting is set in. It just didn't feel primitive and real. You can see me, I start to design a little bit of it, and I kind of designed this head in perspective, and then I said, you know what, I tried to jump too quickly to something satisfactory, and I drew this head, which is fine, and I mean, it's in perspective, it works, but there was really no design. So I said, you know what, this is like a band-aid fix. I need to buckle down and actually design this thing. So I got some references. I spent about less than 10 minutes doing these quick sketches, and I ended up with something I really, really liked in terms of the design of the statue. It's exactly what I envisioned in my head, and I wanted this kind of really roughly hewn, almost like Easter Island head type carving. And as soon as I designed this, I spent less than 10 minutes, and I think it made my image probably like 15-20% better, just this one little change. And I could have done this right at the beginning and saved myself so much time painting something I didn't like. So hopefully you guys can see this as learn from my mistakes, see this as a lesson, because I definitely learned. So, I mean, I've done this so many times, but I still make the mistake of kind of rushing designs like that and painting stuff that's not resolved. But every time I do, it's just a learning moment, and I do it less and less the more that I keep making a mistake. It's getting, you know, tattooed on my brain now that it's happening less and less, and you got to make the mistakes to know how to solve them. So really happy with the change that I made at the end there. That was the last thing that was really bothering me. I mean, the tower design is not, I'm not super happy with the tower, but it's pretty like ruined, and it's kind of, there's a lot of debris and rubble, and it's kind of crumbling, and there's a lot of elements I like about it, but even so, I wish I had done a more resolved design in the beginning, because I think it could be more interesting. But the focus of the piece is really like the mood and the feel, and I'm, in that regard, I'm pretty happy with how the image came out. So I do have to apologize. The end of the video here, there was an issue with OBS where for some reason my output setting got changed to like 640 pixels wide. So the recording was super low res, and I didn't realize until after it was done and I watched it. So it kind of sucks, but it won't happen again, since now I know to look out for that. It's just one of those things that, like, you mess up once and that's it. You'll be checking for that every single time. So you can see now, just, I know it's low res, but I'm just in the end stages of the image. I'm just rendering stuff, and I'm doing a lot of work with edges here. So you can see how many duplicate layers are on the right. I like to flatten the image at the end and just go in with and paint on top, because it kind of takes the digital feel out of the image when you can kind of mix some foreground spots into the midground and the midground into the background, and create kind of lost or hidden edges, and soften things, push things, and pull things, and that creates a really nice finished quality, I find. At least for me, that's kind of aesthetic of painting I like. So I find that really freeing. Once you know the painting's mostly there, it's really, really a freeing feeling to just flatten everything and paint on top. And I'll obviously have all my layers backed up underneath. And the reason there's so many duplicates is because they're just a little bit older versions. So I can turn the current one on and off and see if it's gotten worse. And if it has, then I'll just go bring back whatever element got worse from the previous version. Because you have to be able to see where the painting was, you know, in the last state, because you might just be making it worse and not knowing it, because you have no frame of reference. So just painting around, painting some atmosphere, adding some bounce light, reflection passes, doing some ambient occlusion, and then some overall just color adjustments at the end, and calling it a day. So that's it for this concept, guys. I hope you liked it. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, considering, like, I find it a little bit harder to paint when I'm recording, and I'm sure that other YouTube artists feel this to some degree too, where it's like you feel a little bit stiff and you feel like you don't paint the same way when you're recording, and you know you're gonna share everything that you're doing is going to be seen, so all your mistakes and whatnot. All that considered, I think it's still I'm pretty happy with the result. It's actually pretty close to what I was envisioning. So I hope you guys liked this, and I know I've seen some suggestions for other stuff to cover, and I'm writing all that stuff down, and I want to cover those more specific topics. I'm pretty confident that going forward I'm going to be able to be more consistent with making videos. I've made some adjustments and I've made some investments in my YouTube channel, and I think it's going to pay off, and I'm pretty confident that I can do it a little bit more regularly, so you won't have to wait 6 months between videos. So yeah, please like the channel and subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Please keep commenting your feedback, good and bad. I'm really open to any kind of feedback. It helps me reflect on what I'm doing and areas that I can improve. So thank you guys so much for watching. It really means a lot, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.